Have you ever stood in a place for the first time and felt an unshakable sense of familiarity, as if part of you had been there before? Or have you ever looked into a stranger's eyes and felt, for a fleeting moment, as though you already knew them? These quiet, haunting sensations, difficult to explain, easy to dismiss, have lingered in human experience for as long as memory itself. And beneath them lies a question both ancient and intimate. Could it be that we have lived before? The notion of reincarnation, the idea that something essential within us may return in another body, in another time, has endured through millennia, whispered across cultures, continents, and centuries. But it is not always cloaked in myth or locked inside sacred texts. Sometimes it begins with a child who, before they can tie their shoes or spell their name, begins to say things that leave parents speechless. A boy who talks about crashing a plane during a war that ended decades before he was born. A girl who insists she had a husband and remembers the names of her children, not imaginary ones, but names that trace back to real people, long dead, in places she's never seen. These aren't bedtime stories or fragments of overheard conversations. They are specific, detailed recollections from children with no apparent access to the knowledge they claim. And they have been recorded not only in isolated anecdote, but in hundreds of documented cases, meticulously investigated by researchers who set out to find the truth behind these impossible memories. When a child speaks of being someone else, someone with a different name, different parents, even a different cause of death, we are faced with a mystery that defies easy explanation. Some parents dismiss it as imagination, as children playing make-believe. Others grow uneasy as the details become too precise, too consistent, too rooted in real-world fact. And some, compelled by the strange familiarity in their child's eyes or the sorrow in their voice when speaking of another life, begin to ask questions they never expected to ask. What if consciousness isn't entirely bound to the brain? What if memory, or emotion, or identity can travel across lifetimes like echoes in a canyon, growing fainter, yes, but never fully gone? This exploration begins not with belief or disbelief, but with observation. The strange and often unsettling things children have said, the claims that seem to match records they could not have known, the drawings of places they've never visited, the languages they've never been taught. It begins with a willingness to sit with the uncomfortable, to entertain the possibility that life is more layered than we've been told, and that death, rather than a wall, may be a door we pass through more than once. As we begin this journey into the mystery of reincarnation, we will follow these stories, not to prove or disprove them, but to understand what they might mean. And in doing so, we open a quiet space to wonder, if memory can truly survive death, then who are we, really? In the quiet corners of the world, far from laboratories and lecture halls, some of the most compelling questions about life and death have emerged not from scholars or theologians, but from small children. Toddlers who can barely form full sentences, yet speak with conviction about lives they never lived. It often begins unexpectedly. A child, just beginning to grasp the world around them, utters a sentence that hangs in the air with unsettling weight. "That's where I died?" one boy says as the family car passes a certain stretch of road. A girl clutches at her neck in fear, whispering that something strangled her long ago. These aren't vague daydreams or the playful tales of imagination. They are specific, sometimes disturbingly accurate memories of other people's deaths, lives with details that, upon investigation, appear to match real events, real individuals, and in some cases, real tragedies. What makes these cases so arresting is the consistency in their form. They tend to emerge between the ages of 2 and 5, during a window of life when memory is still elastic and language is just becoming precise enough to express thoughts. The children speak of names they should not know, describe distant cities or events they've never been exposed to, and recount the experience of dying, sometimes traumatically, with eerie clarity. Then, almost as quickly as they came, the memories begin to fade. By the age of 7 or 8, most of them vanish altogether, leaving behind only fragments and the bewilderment of those who witnessed them. One of the most cited cases in modern times is that of a young American boy named James Leininger. From the age of 2, James began having violent nightmares about crashing in a plane. His parents, initially assuming he was reacting to something on television, were startled to discover that James not only knew specific details about World War II fighter aircraft, but referred repeatedly to a particular plane, a particular ship, and even a pilot's name, James Houston Jr., a real man who died in battle decades before James was born. The details were so precise and so verifiable that his case has become one of the most studied modern examples of possible reincarnation. In India, a girl named Swarnlata vividly recalled a previous life in a different town, where she claimed to have been a mother who died young. She identified family members, described her old home in intricate detail, and recognized her former husband, all verified by researchers. Her case was one of many documented by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who spent over 4 decades investigating claims of children with past life memories. He compiled more than 2,000 cases from around the world, often traveling great distances to verify the children's claims, interview witnesses, and document physical and psychological evidence. What Stevenson found was not a proof in the scientific sense, but a pattern. Many of the children he studied belonged to cultures where belief in reincarnation was common, but not all. Some lived in environments where the idea was unheard of, and their families were frightened or skeptical of what the children were saying. In the strongest cases, Stevenson was able to link a child's claims to an actual deceased person, someone whose life details matched what the child described. Sometimes the connections were so uncanny they defied rational explanation. One boy in Turkey recounted being murdered with an axe. He led his parents and researchers to a nearby village, identified the man he claimed had killed him, and even pointed out where the body had been buried. Authorities, investigating further, found the remains and evidence consistent with the child's description. Even more curious are the physical aspects. Stevenson noted that some children were born with birthmarks or birth defects that corresponded to the wounds or injuries of the people they claimed to have been in a previous life. In medical records, photographs, and eyewitness interviews, he found again and again that these marks were not random. They aligned with known causes of death in the matched individuals. Of course, not every story can be verified. Memory is fluid, especially in children. Imagination is powerful, and suggestion, even if unintentional, can influence what a child says or believes. But in many of the cases Stevenson examined, families had no prior belief in reincarnation, and no clear way for the children to have acquired the specific knowledge they displayed. Critics argue that cultural influence and confirmation bias may play a role, especially in regions where reincarnation is widely accepted. But even among skeptics, some concede that a few of the cases resist conventional explanation. The sheer number of consistent stories, particularly those involving names, dates, and verifiable locations, suggests a phenomenon that deserves deeper inquiry, if not outright belief. What's most striking in these stories is the emotional weight they carry. Children who speak of past lives often do so with deep conviction and, at times, great sorrow. They miss people they've never met in this life. They speak of longing, of unfinished tasks, of a desire to return. Some are haunted by the way they died. Others express relief at being born again into a safer or more loving family. Their tone is not that of fantasy, but of lived experience, something seen and felt rather than invented. For parents, these moments can be disorienting. Some fear what it might mean. Others embrace it, comforted by the possibility that the soul is not extinguished but reborn. And for researchers, the challenge lies in exploring such stories with both open-mindedness and critical rigor, balancing the mystery with the need for evidence. In the end, these cases, though numerous, raise more questions than answers. Why do some children remember, while others do not? What causes the memories to fade? If reincarnation exists, what part of us is truly passed on? Consciousness, memory, soul? Or is it something else entirely, something we've yet to name? What these stories offer is not a final answer, but an invitation. An invitation to wonder whether life is truly linear, or if, beneath the surface of what we call reality, something deeper continues on, not as an abstract belief, but as a lived, remembered truth in the minds of the smallest among us. While countless personal stories of past life memories circulate in books, interviews, and family conversations, it was the work of one man, a soft-spoken psychiatrist with a scientific mind and quiet persistence, that brought these accounts into the realm of academic inquiry. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who spent over 4 decades at the University of Virginia, believed that claims of past life memories, particularly those from young children, deserved more than passing curiosity. He believed they deserved methodical, open-minded investigation. Unlike the popular media portrayals of reincarnation that often blend spiritualism and fiction, Stevenson approached the topic with clinical discipline. He didn't seek to prove anything metaphysical. Instead, he asked a simpler question. Are these children actually recalling information they have no normal means of knowing? And if so, what might that suggest about memory, identity, and the boundaries of the human mind? Stevenson's journey began with a single case in India in the 1960s. A young boy named Ravi claimed he had been a man in a different village who died in an accident. His descriptions were so specific, naming relatives, describing the house, even recounting an injury, that Stevenson decided to travel there and investigate. What he found astounded him. The deceased individual Ravi described had indeed existed. The names matched. The injury matched. The family recognized details that only the man himself had known. What began as a single story became the starting point for a lifetime of work. Over the years, Stevenson and his small team documented over 2,000 cases from more than 40 countries. His approach was careful, deliberate, and deeply empirical. Each case was logged with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of data points, names, locations, dates of death, causes of death, family structures, emotional attachments, and physical details. He interviewed parents, relatives, neighbors, and if possible, people who had known the deceased. He looked for inconsistencies, alternative explanations, and possible contamination of information. Cases where coaching or fraud were even remotely possible were discarded. What remained was a collection of hundreds of children whose stories aligned with real people who had died, often violently, just a few years before the child was born. One striking aspect of Stevenson's research was his attention to physical evidence. He noticed that many children who claimed past life memories also bore birthmarks, deformities, or physical traits that corresponded to the wounds or distinguishing features of the person they claimed to have been. In some cases, the child's birthmark was located exactly where the previous person had been shot, stabbed, or injured. Stevenson collected medical records, death certificates, and in many instances, photographs of both the deceased and the child. The visual correlations were difficult to dismiss. In one case, a boy in Thailand insisted he had been a school teacher who was shot in the head. He had a pronounced birthmark at the back of his skull. Stevenson tracked down the teacher, confirmed the fatal injury, and obtained the autopsy report, which showed the bullet's entry point precisely where the boy's mark now lay. In another case, a young girl in Turkey recalled being killed by a shotgun blast. She had multiple small birthmarks scattered across her torso and arms. Stevenson investigated and found a man who had died in the way she described. The autopsy report showed that he had been struck by dozens of pellets in the same pattern as the girl's birthmarks. These were not isolated incidents. Stevenson cataloged over 200 cases in which the physical traits of the child mirrored the trauma of the prior life. While this doesn't confirm reincarnation in the strictest scientific sense, it strongly challenges our understanding of how memory, biology, and identity might be more deeply intertwined than previously believed. Critically, Stevenson didn't limit his studies to cultures that accepted reincarnation. He actively sought cases in places where the belief was uncommon or even frowned upon, such as the American South or parts of Europe. When children in these environments spoke of past lives, they often did so without any cultural framework to support it. Their parents, unfamiliar with the concept, were more likely to resist or ignore the claims, which in Stevenson's eyes reduced the likelihood of suggestion or reinforcement. Skeptics, of course, have offered many explanations. Some argue that children might overhear stories from adults and repeat them unknowingly. Others point to the role of imagination, fantasy, or a deep subconscious desire for meaning. Yet time and again, Stevenson uncovered cases in which the families had no known connection to the deceased, where the information provided was too specific and too obscure to be attributed to chance. Another feature Stevenson observed was the emotional resonance these memories carried. Children didn't simply recall facts. They felt deeply connected to the people and places they spoke of. They grieved for families they no longer had. They longed to return to towns they'd never visited. In some cases, they experienced recurring nightmares or anxieties tied to the way they claimed to have died. Drownings, fires, shootings, falls. The trauma of that earlier death, it seemed, lingered well into their new lives. And then, without warning, the memories would fade. Around the age of 7 or 8, nearly all the children forgot the names, the places, the people. it was as if a curtain slowly descended between two lives. Parents who had been skeptical now found themselves trying to preserve the stories, recording the details, holding on to the evidence before it vanished into ordinary childhood. To this day, Stevenson's work remains controversial. Some scientists dismiss his findings as anecdotal, untestable, or culturally biased. Others, especially those in the fields of consciousness studies and parapsychology, see his data as a treasure trove of insight into one of life's great mysteries. What makes Stevenson's work enduring is not that it offers proof, but that it raises questions that can't easily be waved away. If even one of his cases is valid, if one child truly recalled the life of someone who died before they were born, then the implications are profound. It means that consciousness might not be confined to the brain, that memory might not end at death, and that life, far from being a single arc from birth to nothingness, may be part of a far longer, deeper, and more complex continuum than we ever imagined. As he once wrote, "The study of these cases does not lead us to certainty, but it does suggest that we ought to be humble in assuming we already know all there is to know about the mind, about death, and about what may lie beyond it." In a world increasingly driven by measurable facts and reproducible results, Stevenson's work offers a rare bridge between scientific rigor and human wonder, a place where data and mystery coexist, quietly asking us to look again, to understand how the idea of reincarnation has persisted across generations. It helps to look at the cultures and belief systems that have embraced it, shaped it, and passed it on. Far from being the isolated idea of a single civilization, reincarnation is a thread woven through the spiritual fabric of countless societies, from the high temples of Hindu India to the philosophical schools of ancient Greece, from tribal oral traditions to quietly held modern convictions. In Hinduism, the belief in reincarnation is foundational, not just a spiritual curiosity, but a cosmic law. Known as samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth is understood to be a process that each soul undergoes until it reaches liberation. The soul, or Atman, is seen as eternal, indestructible, and distinct from the temporary shell of the body. When a person dies, the soul leaves the body and eventually takes up residence in a new one, shaped by the actions, or karma, of the life before. The law of karma is not about punishment or reward in the human sense, but about balance and consequence. Every deed leaves a mark, and every life sets the stage for the next. This framework offers a sense of order to the seeming randomness of life. Why is one person born into wealth and another into hardship? Why do some suffer despite doing good, and others thrive despite cruelty? In this system, life is not an isolated event, but a single step in a long and complex journey. Each birth is a continuation. Each death is a transition. And ultimate freedom comes not from clinging to identity, but from transcending the cycle altogether. Buddhism shares many of these ideas, though with key differences. While Buddhism also teaches that beings are reborn, it avoids the idea of a permanent soul. Instead, it describes existence as a stream of consciousness, shaped by desires, attachments, and actions. In this view, what moves from life to life is not a soul, but a flow, a continuity of experiences, tendencies, and unresolved karmic momentum. The ultimate goal is not to be reborn again and again, but to awaken from the cycle entirely through enlightenment, or nirvana. Jainism, a lesser-known Indian tradition, also holds a detailed belief in reincarnation, placing strong emphasis on non-violence and purity of action to influence future births. Sikhism, meanwhile, acknowledges the cycle of reincarnation, but emphasizes union with God as the ultimate release from that cycle, achievable through devotion, humility, and remembrance. Beyond India, the idea of returning after death has echoed in different forms. In ancient Greece, philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato spoke of the soul's journey across multiple lives. Plato, in particular, believed that the soul exists before birth and carries knowledge from previous existences, a view that finds resonance in the mysterious instincts and talents some people seem to possess without explanation. In Egypt, the concept of the soul's continuation took on a more spiritualized form. The Egyptians practiced elaborate funerary rituals, not because they feared death, but because they saw it as a passage. The soul, or rather its multiple parts, was thought to live on, judged and weighed, and prepared for a new existence. In some indigenous cultures, the belief in reincarnation is more communal than individual. Among the Inuit, for example, newborn children are sometimes named after recently deceased elders, with the belief that the spirit returns to the family. In parts of West Africa, the Yoruba people speak of Ayanmo, a destiny shaped before birth and carried through lifetimes. In these systems, reincarnation is not just a spiritual mechanism, but a social one, connecting generations through invisible threads of identity and memory. In more modern contexts, reincarnation has entered the popular imagination in subtler ways. It appears in literature, in dreams, in whispered stories passed between friends. Even among those who don't believe in it literally, the idea often lingers. A sense of unfinished business, a feeling that something continues, a suspicion that the mind may not be so easily extinguished. Interestingly, even in religious traditions that officially reject reincarnation, the idea has found footholds. Early Christianity, for instance, included sects such as the Gnostics, who believed in the pre-existence of the soul and its potential return. While mainstream Christian doctrine eventually denounced reincarnation as heresy, historical records show that the debate was once open. Some suggest that reincarnation was not removed from doctrine because it was disproven, but because it was deemed too dangerous, too liberating for individuals who might question authority if they believed they had infinite chances at life. Islam, similarly, does not accept reincarnation as part of its mainstream theology, emphasizing instead a single life followed by judgment and the afterlife. Yet Sufi mystics, in their more esoteric writings, have hinted at the soul's journey as being far more layered than orthodox interpretations allow. The idea that life unfolds in stages and that the soul may return in veiled forms appears again and again in poetic metaphors and symbolic teachings. What unites these diverse perspectives is not a single shared definition of reincarnation, but a deep human desire to understand what comes after death, and to give meaning to what comes before it. Whether the soul is seen as a distinct spark, a flowing stream, a divine breath, or an illusion altogether, the recurring belief is that something of us continues, and that continuation is not random. It is shaped, guided, and deeply connected to how we live, how we love, how we suffer, and how we let go. Modern secular societies may be less explicit about such ideas, but even in contemporary psychology, concepts of inherited trauma, generational memory, and subconscious imprinting mirror the ancient intuition that lives are not sealed off by death. Dreams, déjà vu, inexplicable fears, sudden connections, all hint at something lingering beneath the surface of ordinary consciousness. Reincarnation, in all its forms, offers more than just a second chance. It presents a vision of life as an unfolding story, not limited to one volume. It suggests that our actions ripple not only through the lives of others, but through time itself. That memory may be deeper than biology. That birth and death are not opposites, but twin events in a larger cycle we are only beginning to grasp. To some, this is metaphor. To others, it is the deepest truth they know. And across cultures, the message is strikingly consistent. Life does not end. It changes form. And whether that form is a return, a release, or something in between, it remains one of the greatest mysteries we carry. There are moments when life comes to a halt, not metaphorically, but literally. The heart stops. The brain flatlines. And yet, when some people are brought back from this edge, they return not just with gratitude, but with stories, vivid, emotional, and strikingly similar across cultures. These are known as near-death experiences, and they have fascinated scientists, spiritual leaders, and ordinary people for decades. At first, they were dismissed. Hallucinations, perhaps. The final firing of dying neurons. But as the accounts multiplied and the details became harder to explain through simple biology, more people began to wonder what actually happens in the moments between life and death. And could these fleeting glimpses offer clues about what, if anything, lies beyond? Near-death experiences, often abbreviated as NDEs, follow a curious pattern. People who experience them report floating above their bodies, observing doctors and nurses working feverishly, hearing conversations they couldn't have heard from a physical perspective. Some describe being drawn down a tunnel toward a warm, brilliant light. Others encounter deceased relatives or spiritual beings. And many return with a profound shift in consciousness, a sense that life is more than the material world, that death is not to be feared, and that some form of awareness exists outside the body. In the 1970s, psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Moody published a book called Life After Life, compiling dozens of these stories. He noticed common themes: feelings of peace, out-of-body perception, meetings with otherworldly beings, and a life review in which one's actions and their emotional impact on others were experienced all at once. The phenomenon was no longer anecdotal. It was becoming a subject of genuine academic interest. Dr. Bruce Grayson, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, the same institution where Dr. Ian Stevenson conducted his reincarnation research, developed what is now known as the Grayson scale, a standardized tool to measure the characteristics of NDEs. This allowed researchers to study them with greater consistency, collecting thousands of cases across different ages, nationalities, and belief systems. What they found was unexpected. Even people who had no religious background, no belief in an afterlife, or no prior exposure to these ideas would report remarkably similar experiences. Children as young as 3 described scenes consistent with adult accounts. Soldiers in war zones, patients undergoing cardiac arrest, and people involved in severe accidents all described the sensation of consciousness separating from the body. There is one case often cited in these discussions, that of a woman named Pam Reynolds. In the 1990s, she underwent a rare and dangerous operation to remove a brain aneurysm. During the procedure, doctors lowered her body temperature to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, drained all the blood from her brain, and induced clinical death. She was monitored with EEG and auditory clicks. By every measure, her brain was inactive. Yet after the surgery, she described floating above her body, watching the medical team, and accurately recounting conversations and instruments used during the operation. She even commented on the appearance of a bone saw, which she described in precise detail, despite her eyes being taped shut and her ears plugged. Skeptics argue that these experiences can be explained through neurochemical activity, oxygen deprivation, or dreamlike hallucinations created by a brain under extreme stress. And in many cases, that might be true. But others point to moments like Pam's, when detailed external observations are made despite clinical indicators of no brain activity, as evidence that something else may be at work. So what do these near-death experiences have to do with reincarnation? While not direct proof of returning to a new life, NDEs challenge the materialist assumption that consciousness ends when the brain stops functioning. If awareness can persist outside the body, even temporarily, it opens the door to a larger view of mind and memory, one where life might not be confined to a single biological vessel. Some who return from NDEs describe being given a choice, to return or to move on. Others feel as though their time simply had not come yet, as if life follows a plan not fully visible from this side. In a few rare instances, people have even described past lives during their NDEs. One man, a Canadian with no prior belief in reincarnation, reported entering a realm during cardiac arrest where he saw not only moments from his current life, but flashes of a life he instinctively felt he had lived before, in a time and place foreign to his own. He later described images of a desert village, a ritual ceremony, and a violent end. The imagery was emotionally overwhelming, yet also strangely grounding. He said it felt less like a vision, and more like something buried that had finally been remembered. These stories are anecdotal, yes, but they accumulate, and they reveal a recurring pattern. People who experience near-death events often return with a new view of existence. They no longer see death as final. They describe a deeper connection to others, a renewed sense of purpose, and a reduced fear of what comes next. Many express an intuitive belief, not based on dogma, but experience, that the soul, or the self, continues in some form. Interestingly, some accounts include meeting unborn souls, entities not yet incarnated, waiting for their moment to enter life. These encounters are difficult to interpret, but they fit remarkably well with reincarnation concepts. If consciousness is not created at birth, but instead enters the body, then NDEs might be glimpses of that in-between realm, the space where souls depart and perhaps later return. In Tibetan Buddhism, this space is called the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth. It is said to be a time of review, transition, and choice. The parallels between traditional teachings and modern NDE reports are striking, even though many experiencers have never encountered the concept of the bardo before. Perhaps then, the value of near-death experiences is not in proving anything beyond doubt, but in pointing us toward a broader framework, one in which death is not a wall, but a bridge. And if reincarnation does occur, then NDEs may be the rare moments when we catch a glimpse of the process from the other side. Whether interpreted spiritually, psychologically, or neurologically, near-death experiences add a layer of texture to our understanding of what it means to be alive, and what might lie just beyond that final breath. Science has long been a language of certainty, of observation, replication, and control. But in recent decades, that certainty has begun to shift. As physicists probe deeper into the structure of reality and neuroscientists map the complexities of the human brain, they have come face to face with something unexpectedly elusive: consciousness itself. What it is, where it resides, and whether it can be reduced to neurons and chemistry remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in science. And within that mystery lies the potential bridge between modern understanding and ancient belief, the idea that consciousness might exist beyond the physical brain and possibly beyond a single lifetime. To begin this exploration, we must first acknowledge that science, as it is practiced today, generally operates within a materialist framework. The belief that all things, including the mind, arise from physical matter. According to this view, consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity. When the brain ceases, so too does awareness. But despite enormous advances in imaging and mapping brain function, no scientist has yet been able to pinpoint the exact location of consciousness, or explain how subjective experience, the feeling of being you, arises from electrical activity in tissue. This problem, often referred to as the hard problem of consciousness, has led some researchers to consider alternative models. One such model comes from quantum physics, a field already known for defying intuitive logic. Quantum theory has revealed that particles can exist in multiple states at once, that observation itself can alter outcomes, and that entangled particles can communicate across vast distances instantaneously. These strange phenomena have caused some to wonder whether consciousness, too, might be a fundamental part of the universe, not simply a byproduct of matter, but something woven into the very structure of reality. Physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed a theory known as OR, or Orchestrated Objective Reduction. In this model, consciousness arises from quantum activity within microtubules, tiny structures inside brain cells. More controversially, they suggest that this quantum activity may persist even after the body dies, potentially allowing aspects of consciousness to continue. While this idea is far from proven and has faced criticism, it reflects a growing openness among some scientists to explore the idea that the mind is not entirely confined to the body. Another scientific frontier that touches on reincarnation is the study of memory and identity. If consciousness does somehow persist beyond death, could it retain traces of memory? Some researchers have pointed to cases of xenoglossy, the ability of individuals, often children, to speak or understand languages they have never been exposed to. In a few rare instances, people have demonstrated knowledge of dialects, customs, or geographic details that are difficult to explain through normal means. These cases are not easily replicated or explained, but they continue to puzzle investigators. At the University of Virginia, Dr. Jim Tucker has continued the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, focusing specifically on children who claim to remember past lives. His methodology is careful, often involving interviews, verification of details, and checks for possible contamination or coaching. In one case, a young boy from Oklahoma began having nightmares about dying in a plane crash. Over time, he revealed specific details: the name of the aircraft carrier, the type of plane, and even the names of fellow pilots. These details were later matched to a real pilot who had died in World War II. The boy had never been exposed to that information through media or family stories. Dr. Tucker has documented over 2,000 cases like this, and while not all are verifiable, a significant number contain accurate and specific information that cannot easily be explained. He has suggested that the data may support the idea of a consciousness energy that carries memory and personality traits, possibly influenced by quantum or unknown physical processes. From a neurological standpoint, the line between brain and mind remains blurred. Studies of patients with brain injuries have revealed surprising resilience. People who function normally with only a fraction of their brain mass, or who recover abilities once thought permanently lost. These anomalies suggest that consciousness may be more distributed or less localized than previously assumed. Furthermore, research into meditation, near-death experiences, and psychedelics has revealed altered states of consciousness that defy simple explanation. Under certain conditions, people report a dissolution of ego, a sense of timelessness, and a merging with something larger. These experiences, while subjective, often leave lasting changes in personality, values, and even brain structure. Some researchers believe these states may offer insights into the mechanics of consciousness itself, perhaps revealing layers usually hidden during ordinary waking life. One area gaining interest is the study of information theory in relation to the mind. Some scientists have proposed that consciousness might function like a form of encoded information, one that interacts with, but is not entirely dependent on, the physical brain. In this view, the brain may be more like a receiver or processor than the origin of the signal. And if that signal is not tied exclusively to the body, it raises the possibility, however speculative, that it could re-emerge in another form. Of course, mainstream science remains cautious. Most scientists agree that much more evidence is needed before reincarnation can be considered within a formal framework. But the very act of asking these questions, of considering that consciousness may not be bound by time, space, or biology, represents a shift. It reflects a willingness to investigate the edges of experience, where data meets mystery, and where ancient intuitions meet modern instruments. At the heart of this inquiry is the human desire to understand who we are and where we go. The scientific method, when applied rigorously and with open-minded skepticism, does not seek to affirm belief, but to explore possibility. And when it comes to reincarnation, the data, while incomplete, refuses to go away. Whether it is the memory of a child, the flash of insight in a near-death moment, or the tangled probabilities of quantum theory, there are signs that something persists beyond death. It may not be conclusive, and it may not yet be fully understood. But it is there, at the edge of what we know, beckoning us to look deeper. Perhaps, as our tools grow more precise and our minds more open, we will begin to map the terrain of consciousness, not just as a product of the brain, but as a dimension of reality, one that may pass through many forms, many lives, and many forgotten names. Long before modern science questioned the boundaries of consciousness, and centuries before formal religions laid out their doctrines, humans looked to the stars, the soil, and the silence of death, and wondered where the soul goes. It wasn't merely a matter of curiosity. It was a deeply rooted need to understand existence as something larger, something cyclical, something that extended beyond the visible edge of a single lifetime. And so, in temples, on scrolls, and through stories whispered around fires, early civilizations began to speak of something that modern minds still grapple with: the possibility of reincarnation. Among the oldest and most enduring examples comes from ancient India. The earliest texts of Hindu philosophy, the Vedas and the Upanishads, describe the soul not as a one-time occurrence, but as an eternal essence, moving from one body to another in a continuous journey of birth, death, and rebirth. They called it samsara, the wheel of existence, and believed that each life is shaped by karma, the cumulative weight of one's actions. This wasn't merely punishment or reward, but a system of balance and learning, an evolving path toward eventual liberation, known as moksha. In this worldview, life is not a straight line with a beginning and an end, but a spiral, ever deepening, ever returning. Buddhism would later inherit and refine this perspective. The Buddha taught that attachment to the self, this illusion of separateness, was the root of suffering, and that understanding the impermanence of life could break the cycle of rebirth. Yet even within the Buddhist rejection of ego, there was a recognition that something continued, a stream of consciousness, not identical to the person who lived before, but not entirely different either. Like a flame passed from one candle to the next, no longer the same flame, yet still connected. While Eastern traditions openly embraced reincarnation, the West held its own quiet echoes of the same idea. In ancient Egypt, the soul was believed to be composed of multiple parts, each with a role in navigating both the earthly and the divine. The Ka, or life force, and the Ba, or personality, were thought to persist beyond death, reuniting in the afterlife. Though not reincarnation in the same mold as Hinduism, Egyptian beliefs carried a clear understanding that life did not simply vanish at death. Some pharaohs were even believed to return in new forms, carrying forward divine power across generations. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras, known for his mathematical theories, also taught that the soul was immortal and passed into new bodies. According to his followers, he could remember several of his own past lives. Later, Plato would echo similar ideas, writing in the Republic that souls choose their next lives before being born again, forgetting all that came before. For Plato, this cycle wasn't meaningless. It was a moral progression, a way for the soul to learn and grow. These philosophical notions weren't limited to mystics or sages. In the mystery schools of ancient Greece, private religious institutions that promised insight into the divine, rituals were performed to prepare the soul for what came after. The Orphic texts, poetic fragments from an earlier religious movement, describe the soul's descent into the body and its long, winding path back to purity through multiple incarnations. Participants wore golden tablets inscribed with instructions for navigating the afterlife, as if rehearsing the journey they believed they would one day take again and again. In parts of West Africa, indigenous belief systems long maintained that ancestors returned to the family line, born again into their descendants. These beliefs, still alive today in many cultures, emphasize continuity, not only of bloodlines, but of memory, duty, and spirit. Elders may name a child after a deceased relative and speak of them not as two separate beings, but as one soul passing through different times. This view blurs the boundary between the living and the dead, between past and present. Among the Celts of ancient Europe, stories of heroes returning in new forms, of warriors reborn to finish what they began, filled oral traditions. Druids were said to teach the immortality of the soul and its passage through many lives. Roman historian Julius Caesar, encountering these beliefs in Gaul, noted that such views made the Celts fearless in battle. They believed death was not an end, but a transformation. In early Jewish mysticism, particularly in Kabbalistic thought, there exists the concept of Gilgul, the transmigration of souls. Though not mainstream in early Judaic teachings, Gilgul became influential among certain rabbinic scholars, who saw reincarnation as a way for souls to correct mistakes and fulfill unfinished spiritual tasks. Each life was viewed not as a random event, but as part of a larger spiritual architecture, subtle, complex, and purposeful. Even early Christian thought may have flirted with reincarnation. Some early Christian sects, such as the Gnostics and the followers of Origen of Alexandria, believed in the pre-existence of souls and the possibility of return. Origen taught that souls existed before birth and would continue after death, evolving through multiple lives. However, by the 6th century, reincarnation was declared heretical by the Church, and such teachings were suppressed. The mystery, however, never vanished. It simply went underground. What is remarkable is not the uniqueness of these ideas, but their persistence. Across time zones, across language barriers and cultural divides, humans have again and again returned to the same central theme: that life continues beyond the moment we call death, and that the soul, whatever it may be, travels on. Some have suggested that this widespread belief is rooted in psychological comfort, a way to cope with the fear of mortality. But others ask a deeper question. What if this idea is not merely cultural, but intuitive? What if, on some level, we all carry a quiet memory of having been here before? It may not be the details that matter, whether one is reborn as a different gender in a different land, with no recollection of what came before. It may be the sense that existence is not random, not limited to a single chapter, but part of a broader story in which each of us plays many roles. That story, told through myth, religion, and philosophy, continues to echo in modern conversations about consciousness, memory, and the soul. Reincarnation is not merely a spiritual doctrine. It is an enduring human response to the mystery of existence. It is a thread that runs through history, linking sages, children, skeptics, and visionaries. And whether one accepts it literally or symbolically, the idea challenges us to see life not as a fleeting spark, but as a continuum, one in which the soul perhaps never truly vanishes. As the 20th century unfolded, a quiet transformation began to take shape. In the midst of rapid technological progress, global conflict, and the unraveling of old religious certainties, many people began looking inward, searching not for external authority, but for personal meaning. It was in this shifting landscape that the ancient idea of reincarnation found new life, no longer confined to temples and sacred texts, but now emerging through books, therapy sessions, and deeply personal spiritual journeys. The concept was no longer just theological. It became psychological, experiential, and deeply individual. By the 1960s and 70s, the rise of the New Age movement brought reincarnation back into the Western imagination, but now refracted through a lens of inner growth, cosmic unity, and self-discovery. This was not the reincarnation of strict doctrine or rigid dogma. It was fluid, evolving, and open-ended. Many people began to see reincarnation not as a divine punishment or reward, but as an opportunity, a spiritual classroom in which the soul returned again and again to learn, heal, and evolve. Books such as The Search for Bridie Murphy introduced the public to the idea of past life regression, where individuals under hypnosis seemed to access memories from other lifetimes. In these sessions, people described names, languages, landscapes, and events they had never encountered in waking life. Some accounts were vague and dreamlike. Others were remarkably detailed, sparking debate over whether these were true memories, symbolic visions, or psychological constructs. Whether fact or fiction, these stories resonated with something deep in the collective psyche. They offered an explanation for irrational fears, strange affinities, and unresolved emotional wounds. A person terrified of drowning might recall, under hypnosis, dying in a shipwreck. Someone drawn inexplicably to a particular culture or era might remember living there centuries ago. Even if not literally true, these memories became metaphors for healing, a way to access unconscious material and give it narrative form. Psychologists like Dr. Brian Weiss, once a skeptic trained in traditional psychiatry, became vocal proponents of past life therapy after witnessing profound transformations in his patients. In his best-selling book, Many Lives, Many Masters, Weiss recounts the story of a woman who began recalling vivid past lives during hypnosis, experiences that seemed to resolve her deep-seated phobias and anxieties in the present. For Weiss and others, the therapeutic value of these experiences became undeniable, even if the mechanism behind them remained mysterious. Reincarnation, in this new context, became part of a broader spiritual toolkit, a means of exploring identity beyond the boundaries of a single birth certificate. It no longer required belief in a particular religion or philosophy. Instead, it invited people to view life as a tapestry of experiences stretched across time. Each lifetime, whether remembered or not, was thought to shape the soul's evolution, gradually sculpting a deeper awareness, a clearer sense of purpose, and a more expansive compassion. This version of reincarnation often intersected with other spiritual ideas. Karma as an energetic law of cause and effect, soulmates as recurring companions across lifetimes, and life contracts made before birth to set the conditions for learning. These ideas were not always consistent or scientifically rigorous, but they offered comfort, coherence, and a sense of agency in the face of suffering. Rather than seeing hardship as meaningless, believers could interpret challenges as part of a soul's curriculum, a chosen path to growth. The popularity of these ideas exploded through workshops, retreats, and spiritual literature. Terms like old soul, soul group, and life between lives entered everyday vocabulary. Artists and thinkers drew inspiration from these themes, weaving them into novels, films, and music. Reincarnation was no longer a fringe idea. It became part of the cultural conversation, particularly in Western societies hungry for meaning beyond material success. Technology also played a role in this resurgence. With the rise of the internet and digital media, people from different backgrounds could share their experiences, research, and beliefs instantly. Forums, podcasts, and videos emerged where individuals discussed their past life memories, dreams, and spiritual encounters. Some told stories of spontaneous recall, vivid flashes of memory triggered by a location, a scent, or a face. Others described dreams so coherent and emotionally charged they felt more like memories than imagination. Skeptics argued that these experiences could be explained through psychology, fantasy-prone personalities, suggestibility under hypnosis, or the brain's tendency to construct meaning from scattered impressions. They pointed to the lack of verifiable evidence and the danger of false memories. And while these critiques are valid and important, they rarely diminished the subjective power of the experiences themselves. For those who lived them, the memories felt real, and the emotional healing that followed was often profound. Interestingly, some neuroscientists and consciousness researchers have begun to take cautious interest in these phenomena. While they may not accept reincarnation in a literal sense, they acknowledge that the human mind is capable of profound experiences that transcend conventional understanding. Some suggest that memory, identity, and even time itself may be more fluid than previously assumed. This openness is partly due to the increasing number of studies exploring altered states of consciousness, from near-death experiences to psychedelic journeys to deep meditation. These states often share common themes: a feeling of leaving the body, encountering other realms, meeting deceased loved ones, and receiving knowledge that transcends the individual self. Some experiencers describe visiting a place between lives, a realm of light, guidance, and review, before returning to physical existence. While these reports remain anecdotal, their consistency across cultures and individuals is striking. In this modern landscape, reincarnation becomes less about proving a doctrine and more about exploring the soul's story. It becomes a framework for understanding human complexity, for seeing trauma, talent, and temperament as part of a longer arc. It encourages empathy, humility, and introspection. After all, if we have lived many lives, and may live many more, then each person we meet could be an old friend, a former rival, or even a part of ourselves. Of course, questions remain. If reincarnation is real, why don't we all remember? Why are the memories so fleeting, so fragile? What mechanism could possibly store and transfer identity across bodies and time? These are mysteries not easily answered. But for many, the absence of certainty is not a barrier. It is the beginning of wonder. Reincarnation, as reimagined by modern spiritual seekers, is not just about what happens after death. It is about what it means to be alive, fully, presently, and consciously. It invites us to view our lives as meaningful beyond what we can see, and to act with intention, knowing that everything we do may ripple far beyond this single lifetime. There is a moment, suspended between heartbeat and silence, when the body seems to shut down, but the mind does not. It's in that thin, uncertain space that near-death experiences unfold. For those who return from the brink, what they describe is often profound and perplexing. Many speak not of emptiness, but of clarity, not of nothingness, but of overwhelming presence, as if death were not a wall, but a veil briefly lifted. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, have been reported for centuries, often dismissed as hallucinations or spiritual tales. But in recent decades, as medicine has advanced and more lives have been pulled back from the edge, accounts have become more common, more detailed, and more difficult to ignore. And whether one sees them as metaphysical events or neurological phenomena, these stories raise fascinating questions about consciousness and about what, if anything, might persist after death. The patterns are strangely consistent. People who are declared clinically dead, without heartbeat or detectable brain activity, later describe vivid and coherent experiences. They speak of floating above their bodies, observing doctors performing CPR or loved ones in other rooms. Some describe being drawn toward a tunnel, moving toward an intense but non-blinding light, and encountering a presence they can't fully describe. Not a figure, always, but a sense of deep, unconditional awareness. For many, there is a life review, not as judgment, but as insight. They say they re-experience moments of kindness and cruelty, not from their own perspective, but from the point of view of those they affected. Every word, every glance, every small act ripples outward. There's no punishment, only understanding. Then, often with reluctance, they return to a hospital bed, to pain, to life. While these accounts are moving, they are also controversial. Some neuroscientists argue they can be explained by oxygen deprivation, the release of endorphins, or a final burst of brain activity. Yet others point out that many of these experiences occur at times when the brain is demonstrably inactive. And there are verified cases where people reported details they could not have perceived through normal senses, what doctors were doing, conversations in nearby rooms, objects that were later confirmed. But what connects near-death experiences to reincarnation is not just the idea of a soul or consciousness surviving death. It's the sense that life is part of something larger, a cycle, a continuum, a pattern of experience that stretches beyond one lifetime. Some NDEs include encounters with beings who tell the person their time has not come or that they still have things to learn. Others describe being shown different lives, not memories, but possibilities. Some return with the feeling that they chose to come back, or even that they had lived before. There are those who wake up with knowledge they didn't have before, languages they never studied, skills they never practiced, or an entirely new personality. A shy person becomes bold. An atheist finds unshakable faith. Some people return with strange physical changes, heightened senses, or inexplicable knowledge of others' thoughts and emotions. These shifts are difficult to explain through biology alone. For those who believe in reincarnation, these experiences seem to align with the idea that the soul is on a journey, and that death is not the end of that journey, only a transition. In some traditions, the soul is said to rest in an in-between state, a realm of reflection, where it prepares for its next life. This between lives state has been described in Tibetan Buddhism as the bardo, a place of transition where the soul reflects, learns, and moves on. Interestingly, some people under hypnosis, in what is called life between lives regression, describe similar places. They speak of meeting guides, reviewing past lives, and choosing new circumstances based on what their soul still needs to learn. These sessions are often accompanied by strong emotion and vivid imagery. Whether these are memories, dreams, or something more is up for debate, but their power is undeniable. Near-death experiences also cut across religious boundaries. Christians, Hindus, Muslims, atheists, all have reported similar phenomena, even though their interpretations differ. This has led some researchers to suggest that these experiences reflect a universal aspect of human consciousness, one that transcends cultural conditioning. If true, it suggests that whatever lies beyond death, if anything, may be more universal than we think. Yet, not all NDEs are peaceful. Some describe dark, frightening landscapes, feelings of isolation or being pulled downward. These hellish experiences are less common, but have been documented. Interestingly, those who undergo them often make radical changes in their lives afterward, seeking forgiveness, living more compassionately, becoming more spiritual. These shifts, regardless of belief, point to something transformative in the experience itself. Critics argue that the brain is capable of generating extraordinary experiences under stress. They point to dreamlike logic, inconsistencies, and the influence of prior beliefs. Yet the consistency of details among people from vastly different backgrounds remains a puzzle. Why should so many people describe the same tunnel, the same light, the same sense of love and life review? Why do children, with no exposure to religious ideas, sometimes describe the same journey? It's not necessary to believe that all NDEs prove life after death, but they do suggest that our understanding of consciousness is incomplete. They challenge the idea that the mind is purely a product of the brain. They hint at layers of awareness we have yet to map, and perhaps never will. In the context of reincarnation, these experiences may represent more than a glimpse of what happens after we die. They may be a reminder that life is not a single, isolated thread, but a tapestry woven through time. The choices we make, the lives we touch, the lessons we ignore or embrace, all may echo beyond what we can see. For those who have had NDEs, the takeaway is rarely about proof. It is about perspective. Many speak of losing their fear of death, gaining a sense of purpose, or feeling connected to everything around them. They describe the world as more alive, more sacred. Even if what they experienced was a final dream, it was one that changed them forever. In the end, whether near-death experiences are glimpses of another realm or creations of a brain under stress, they reveal something profound about what it means to be human. They show that the moment between life and death is not empty. It is full of memory, meaning, and perhaps the mystery of return. The human brain is a marvel of biology, a structure of neurons, chemical signals, and complex patterns that allow us to think, dream, and remember. For centuries, it was assumed that consciousness arose entirely from these interactions, as a byproduct of the brain's electrical activity. And yet, for all of modern science's achievements, the question of what consciousness actually is remains elusive. It is not just how we think or feel, it is the core awareness that we are alive, experiencing, choosing. In the context of reincarnation, this mystery of consciousness becomes central. If there is something within us that can survive death, continue on, or even carry memory across lifetimes, then it must be something that transcends the physical body. This idea may sound mystical at first, but some scientists, particularly in the fields of quantum physics and neuroscience, have begun to question whether consciousness is more fundamental to the universe than we once believed. One of the most provocative ideas in this space is that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but received by it, like a radio picking up a signal. In this analogy, the brain doesn't create the self, but filters and shapes it for this particular lifetime. When the body dies, the signal isn't lost. It simply stops being received by that particular receiver. This would allow for the possibility that a different receiver, a new body, could someday pick up aspects of the same consciousness, particularly if certain conditions align. This perspective is bolstered by the surprising findings in quantum mechanics, where the behavior of particles seems to be influenced by observation. At the smallest scales, reality is not fixed until it is observed, a phenomenon known as the observer effect. Some theorists have wondered whether this suggests that consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping the universe. If consciousness is not just a byproduct of matter, but a property of reality itself, then perhaps it is not bound by a single body or a single lifetime. Further adding to the mystery is the phenomenon of entanglement, in which particles separated by vast distances appear to influence each other instantaneously. This challenges our assumptions about space and time, suggesting that information, or perhaps even awareness, may be connected in ways we do not yet understand. Could something similar happen with human consciousness? Could aspects of a personality, a memory, or an emotional pattern become entangled across lifetimes? There are also fringe theories that propose a kind of quantum field for consciousness, akin to the electromagnetic field that surrounds charged particles. In this view, every living being contributes to and draws from a vast field of awareness, a collective mind. This concept mirrors ancient spiritual ideas such as the Akashic records or the collective unconscious, suggesting that memory and identity might be stored in the very fabric of the universe. Skeptics argue that such ideas are speculative at best, lacking rigorous evidence. And it is true. Science demands more than poetic metaphors or intriguing hypotheses. Yet, what is also true is that current scientific models have no complete explanation for subjective experience, for why we feel, why we dream, why we are. Some researchers, dissatisfied with the limits of materialism, have begun to explore panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of all matter. In this view, even particles have a rudimentary form of awareness, and complex systems like human beings simply represent higher-order expressions of it. If this is so, then perhaps what we call a soul is not something added to the body, but something already woven into the cosmos. Reincarnation, in this framework, becomes a process of reconfiguration, a new pattern forming in the field, drawing from past structures, experiences, and emotional imprints. Memory, then, would not need to be stored in the brain alone. It could exist non-locally, like information in a cloud, accessible under certain conditions, whether in dreams, altered states, or even early childhood. Another theory, sometimes referred to as the holographic universe hypothesis, suggests that the entire cosmos is like a projection, that all of space and time are encoded in a kind of two-dimensional information field at the edge of the universe. If our experience is a projection from this field, then perhaps the soul, too, is not confined to space or time. Reincarnation would not mean a soul travels from body to body, but that identities can emerge again and again, drawn from this field like patterns of light on a screen. While these theories remain on the edges of mainstream science, they offer fascinating possibilities. They remind us that we may not yet fully understand what it means to be alive, or what it means to die. Consciousness, memory, and selfhood may be more flexible than we imagine. And if even a portion of these ideas are true, then reincarnation is not a fantasy, but a phenomenon awaiting a new language. It is important to note that not all scientists accept these ideas, and many are highly skeptical of linking quantum theory with spiritual concepts. There is a real risk of overextending metaphors and drawing conclusions not supported by data. But within science itself, the boundaries are shifting. New tools in neuroscience, AI, and physics are revealing just how much we do not know about the nature of the mind. The very act of asking these questions opens the door to deeper inquiry. What makes the study of reincarnation both challenging and profound is that it touches both the outer and inner worlds. It invites rigorous investigation into cases of past life memory, and it also asks us to explore the contours of our own identity, to ask who we are beneath our roles, our history, our personality. If something of us survives death, then it must also be something that precedes birth, and that, in turn, reshapes the way we see life itself. Scientific inquiry may never be able to capture the soul in a test tube, but it can, and perhaps must, remain open to the possibility that our current models are incomplete. As the limits of materialism become clearer, more thinkers are beginning to suspect that mind and matter are not separate, and that consciousness may be more fundamental than form. In this sense, science and spirituality need not be at odds. They are both, in their truest forms, attempts to understand reality, one through measurement, the other through meaning. Reincarnation may be where these two paths converge, where data meets mystery, and where story meets structure. Whether we find ourselves returning in another body, or whether our essence becomes part of something larger, the question remains the same. What is it that makes us us? And can that essence ever truly disappear? Across time and continents, long before the word reincarnation was ever coined, there have been whispers of return. The quiet idea that death is not the end, but simply the next curve in a much longer path. While Eastern philosophies often dominate modern conversations around past lives, the belief that something of the self survives death and begins again is far more widespread than most people realize. Among many indigenous cultures of North America, the idea of souls returning within families is not unfamiliar. The Inuit of Canada, for instance, have traditionally believed that newborns might inherit the spirits of deceased relatives. A child might display personality traits, behaviors, or knowledge that echo someone long gone, and elders often take such resemblances seriously. These aren't dismissed as coincidences, but seen as meaningful signs of continuity within the community and the spirit world. In parts of West Africa, especially among the Yoruba and Ewe peoples, spiritual beliefs include the idea that ancestors can return through descendants. Reincarnation is not random, it is purposeful. The child returns to complete unfinished work, to restore harmony, or to guide the family. Naming rituals often reflect this. A child might be given the name of a deceased elder, not as tribute, but as recognition. The living and the dead exist on a spectrum rather than separate planes. Even in ancient Europe, long before Christianity took hold, some Celtic and Druidic traditions held beliefs in the transmigration of souls. Life was seen as a circular journey rather than a straight line. Death marked a transition, not into nothingness, but into another form, another role, another chance. It's a worldview that values life not as a single spark, but as an enduring flame passed from torch to torch. Among the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, reincarnation is not always discussed in direct terms, but the connection between the living and the spiritual world is deeply felt. Shamans speak of soul journeys, of knowledge passed between realms. The forest itself is considered alive with memory, suggesting that awareness may not be confined to the human experience alone. Even Christianity, traditionally resistant to the idea of multiple lifetimes, contains historical traces of reincarnational thought. Early Gnostic sects, long since labeled heretical, embraced the idea that the soul learns and grows over successive lives. While modern doctrine rejects reincarnation, the early church wrestled with questions of justice, grace, and the soul's progression in ways that echoed its logic. In all these diverse traditions, one truth seems to echo again and again. Life is not a closed system. It flows, it returns, it continues. Whether through lineage, memory, or spirit, the idea of coming back, of continuing the story, seems to answer a longing older than any book or belief. A longing to know that we are more than this moment, more than one lifetime, and that somehow we are not just passing through the world, but part of a story still unfolding. For every story of past life memory that seems impossible to explain, there is a scientist or skeptic asking a different question. Could there be another reason this child remembers what they do? After all, the human mind is not a flawless recorder of truth. It is a pattern maker, a meaning seeker, and sometimes a builder of elaborate illusions. Understanding reincarnation requires not just openness, but also a careful examination of what memory really is and how it can deceive us. Some researchers propose that these so-called past life memories may be the result of cryptomnesia, a phenomenon where forgotten information resurfaces without the person realizing they had encountered it before. A child might overhear a story, glimpse a photograph, or absorb details from conversations around them, and later recall that material as if it were their own. The brain, still forming and highly impressionable in early childhood, is especially vulnerable to this kind of misattributed memory. Others point to the power of suggestion. Children are naturally imaginative, eager to please, and responsive to adult cues. If a child says something odd, like, "I had a wife once," and the adults around them respond with fascination or encouragement, the child may unconsciously expand the story, adding more detail each time. Over time, this narrative can grow into something that feels very real, not just to others, but to the child themselves. Psychologists also note that young children often struggle to distinguish fantasy from reality. Vivid dreams, stories, or television can blur into personal experience. A dramatic film about a war or a fire might linger in the subconscious and resurface as a memory. And because children are highly empathic, they might internalize someone else's story so deeply that it begins to feel like their own. There's also the question of identity formation. In early childhood, the brain is actively constructing a sense of self. For some, particularly those with emotional sensitivity or trauma, crafting an identity around a dramatic previous life might serve as a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of deep feelings or fears they cannot yet articulate. And then, of course, there is the placebo of belief itself. In families or cultures where reincarnation is expected, children may be more likely to express such memories, not because they are dishonest, but because their environment gives them a framework to interpret strange sensations or ideas. Cultural shaping plays a powerful role in how we interpret our own minds. Yet none of these explanations entirely erase the mystery. While many cases can be attributed to psychology or coincidence, there remain a few that challenge the usual scripts. Skepticism is essential, but so is humility. As science continues to explore memory, identity, and consciousness, the mystery of past lives may not vanish. It may simply evolve into a deeper question. What is the mind truly capable of? And where do its boundaries end? In a quiet room, the lights are dimmed and the air holds a stillness, like the calm before memory. The subject sits or lies comfortably, eyes closed, heart steady. A soft voice begins to guide them, not toward a memory of this life, but of another, of a time, a place, a name they've never spoken aloud. Past life regression therapy begins not with proof, but with openness, a willingness to ask what might lie beneath the surface of what we think we are. The process relies on relaxation, sometimes light hypnosis, to quiet the conscious mind and let the subconscious speak. Therapists or regression guides ease the subject into a trance-like state, using visualization techniques to peel away the layers of time. Go back, they'll say, back to before this body, this name, this life. The responses, when they come, are often fragmented. An image of an unfamiliar place, the feeling of a different body, or a name that comes out of nowhere, spoken with quiet certainty. As the session deepens, those fragments may expand into full narratives. A man in Victorian England, a woman in ancient China, a soldier in the First World War. People describe sights, smells, textures of lives they couldn't possibly know. Some speak in unfamiliar dialects. Others weep as they recall the moment of their own death. And perhaps most remarkably, they report emotions that feel profound and inexplicably personal. Grief, longing, love for people whose names they've never heard in waking life. For those who experience it, the memories can feel more vivid than dreams and more immersive than fiction. They're not just stories, they feel lived. And that lived feeling is what gives regression its emotional weight. Therapists who use this method often say that the value of regression isn't always in discovering a factual past life, but in what the journey reveals about the present. A person who fears drowning might recall a past life ending in a shipwreck. Someone unable to explain their lifelong guilt might uncover a vision of having once betrayed a friend or child. Whether or not these memories are historically accurate, the emotional patterns they uncover often resonate deeply with the client's current struggles. For many, that resonance becomes a tool for healing, an untying of knots they didn't know existed. Practitioners of regression therapy argue that our traumas, fears, and even physical symptoms may sometimes be echoes of unresolved events from earlier incarnations. By bringing these memories to light, by confronting them with conscious awareness, the energy trapped within them can be released. It's a therapeutic principle borrowed from psychoanalysis and reframed in spiritual terms. What is unspoken continues to shape us, but what is named can begin to heal. Of course, not everyone accepts these experiences at face value. Many psychologists remain skeptical, cautioning that the brain is a master of invention. In hypnotic states, people are often highly suggestible. When asked to remember something specific, especially something as dramatic as a past life, the mind may reach for scraps of history, media, stories, or symbols and weave them together into a narrative that feels coherent. These memories may be real only in the emotional sense. There's also the risk of leading questions. If a therapist unintentionally nudges a client toward specific themes, do you see a battlefield? Or are you wearing a robe? They may influence what the client imagines. The power of suggestion, especially in hypnosis, is strong. Critics argue that many past life regressions reflect this co-creative process between guide and subject, rather than any authentic record of lived experience. False memories are not a minor concern. In the 1980s and 1990s, a wave of controversies erupted around recovered memory therapy, where some individuals under hypnosis came to believe they had experienced traumas that later turned out to be unsubstantiated or false. The emotional distress caused by these mistaken beliefs was very real. Today, mental health professionals stress the importance of carefully distinguishing between therapeutic metaphor and literal truth. Yet, past life regression persists, quietly, personally, often outside of mainstream psychology. For many, it is not about historical validation, but transformation. People report breakthroughs in long-standing phobias, deep insights into personality traits, and newfound compassion for themselves and others. Whether these experiences are past lives or symbolic dreams, they leave a mark. There are also attempts to bridge the gap between spiritual exploration and scientific inquiry. Dr. Brian Weiss, a psychiatrist and former department chair at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami, became a prominent figure in the field after a patient under hypnosis unexpectedly began recalling past lives. Despite his initial disbelief, he claimed that her sessions revealed accurate details about long-dead individuals and led to emotional healing. Weiss went on to write books and conduct seminars, popularizing regression as a path to inner peace. His critics, however, point out that anecdotal stories, no matter how compelling, are not the same as scientific evidence. Regression therapy remains outside the bounds of evidence-based psychology. Controlled studies are rare, and mechanisms remain speculative. Still, the popularity of the practice points to a widespread hunger. People want their pain to mean something, their patterns to have a source, their journey to have depth. Perhaps this is the heart of the matter. Past life regression, whether real or imagined, allows people to think of their lives not as isolated sparks, but as threads in a much longer weave. The idea that we are not just this moment, this name, this body, but something older, something still becoming, offers comfort and purpose. It gives a kind of dignity to our confusion, a sense that the pain we carry might not be random, but the continuation of a longer story still being told. So, Whether these sessions are glimpses into hidden truths or mirrors reflecting our deepest needs, they remain powerful. In the dim light of the therapist's room, with eyes closed and breath steady, a person may feel as if they are returning, not to a place, but to a knowing, to a sense that somewhere in the layers of self, something remembers. And that memory, true or not, still matters. There are moments in life so extreme, so unexpected, that they seem to pull back the veil between this world and whatever lies beyond. Near-death experiences, those curious events reported by people who have been clinically dead for seconds or minutes only to return, have fascinated scientists, doctors, and philosophers for decades. Some of these stories describe floating above hospital beds, seeing blinding lights, or being welcomed by loved ones long gone. But others whisper of something even more mysterious, the sense that death is not an end, but a turning point. That consciousness continues, and even returns. While near-death experiences and reincarnation are often studied separately, there is an intriguing overlap. In both, there is a suggestion that our sense of identity, our self, is not confined to a single lifetime. And in some NDE accounts, people report seeing not just their current life flash before them, but what feel like fragments of other lives, as if the soul carries a long and tangled memory. One woman in India, declared dead after complications during childbirth, later described a vision where she stood in a field of light, surrounded by people who felt familiar yet unknown. She was told, silently and clearly, that she had been here before, not once, but many times. "You have work left to do," a voice told her, "but you will return again when it is time." She was revived minutes later, her heart restarted, and never forgot the encounter. For her, it was a message not just about survival, but about continuity. In another case, a man struck by lightning in Colorado claimed that during his brief cardiac arrest, he entered a realm where time did not exist. He felt himself connected to a stream of identities, some male, some female, some in places and bodies unfamiliar. It wasn't memory exactly, but recognition. He later described it as a remembering of being many different people, all trying to learn something. Before his experience, he had never believed in reincarnation. Afterward, he couldn't shake the feeling that death might be more like waking up than falling asleep. What's especially compelling about these accounts is how they seem to bypass belief. Many of those who report NDEs involving past or parallel lives were not looking for such answers. Some had no background in spirituality. Some were skeptical, even hostile to the idea of reincarnation. And yet, in their moment of clinical death, with no heartbeat, no breathing, no awareness detectable from the outside, they came back with the same quiet knowing that the soul does not vanish, it moves. From a scientific standpoint, near-death experiences are difficult to study. The brain under extreme stress, hypoxia, or trauma can produce vivid hallucinations. Neurochemicals like DMT, released in moments of crisis, might generate powerful dreamlike visions. Critics argue that NDEs are internal, not external, created by a brain in distress, not by any actual crossing into another realm. But even if that is true, the content of these experiences remains astonishing. Why would a brain invent other lives, past selves, or spiritual teachers if none of these ideas had been present before? And why do so many unrelated individuals report similar feelings? Of floating, of peace, of returning from a journey rather than escaping death. Some researchers, like Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, have tried to approach this question scientifically. In his studies of cardiac arrest patients, he found that a small but consistent percentage reported clear and structured NDEs, including memories formed during periods of flat brainwave activity. These patients spoke of existing outside the body, of conversations overheard while clinically dead, and in rare cases, of seeing events or people from before their current life. In one case, a young girl who nearly drowned described meeting a little boy in her NDE who said, "I was your brother once, but I didn't get to grow up." The parents later admitted, with disbelief, that the mother had miscarried a boy years earlier, something the girl had never been told. Stories like this hover on the edge of verifiability. They're deeply personal, difficult to measure, yet persistent in their patterns. From a metaphysical perspective, some spiritual traditions suggest that the moment of death is also a moment of choice. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, for instance, describes a process of transition through various bardos, states between death and rebirth, during which the soul is presented with visions, emotions, and opportunities for release or return. In this view, what we experience at the brink of death might not just be a reflection of brain chemistry, but a true glimpse into the machinery of reincarnation. And perhaps that is why near-death experiences, even when brief or confusing, often leave such a profound emotional mark. People return not just changed, but shifted. They describe a loss of fear, a deeper empathy, a sense of purpose. Some take up new paths in life. Some quietly accept that they will be back, that this is not their only story. There is also an increasing number of shared death experiences, events in which people at the bedside of a dying loved one report seeing lights, feeling presences, or briefly experiencing the sensation of leaving their own body. In rare cases, they too describe a fleeting impression of past lives or other identities. These accounts, while less publicized, add another layer to the mystery. What all of this suggests is that reincarnation, if it exists, may not always arrive through slow memory or childhood recall. It may break through in moments of crisis, when the boundary between life and death grows thin, and something ancient within us begins to stir. The overlap between near-death experiences and reincarnation accounts is still being explored, but the voices continue to gather. They don't offer certainty. They rarely offer proof, but they offer a feeling that the path is not straight, and that the self may be more than we ever imagined. They tell us, gently and persistently, that perhaps death is not the end of the line, only the curve in the road just before we start remembering where we've already been. There comes a moment, after all the stories have been told, after the cases and theories have been laid out, when silence feels more informative than noise. Not because the answers are clear, but because the questions have grown deeper. Reincarnation, once dismissed as folklore or mysticism, now stands at the edge of serious inquiry, where personal experience, cross-cultural tradition, and scientific skepticism meet like shorelines against the same sea. It's easy to catalog the elements. The child who remembers a name from a faraway village, the soldier who claims to have died twice, the mother who sees her lost daughter in the eyes of a newborn, the regression therapy session where a voice emerges from the past, the near-death experience that brushes the veil between worlds and returns with symbols too old to be invented. These are individual events, scattered and subjective, but the pattern they form, when viewed together, begins to feel deliberate. And it's not just the emotional impact of these accounts that makes them compelling, it's the uncanny similarities across cultures, religions, and time periods. From ancient Hindu scriptures to Buddhist philosophy, from the druidic cycle of soul journeys to the quiet stories passed down in tribal oral traditions, the idea that we return is remarkably persistent. It is humanity's quiet secret, whispered in rituals, remembered in dreams, felt in déjà vu, encoded in language. When people say, an old soul, they mean something deeper than age. Yet, despite all of this, reincarnation remains a paradox. It resists certainty. It refuses measurement. There is no formula, no predictable mechanism, no universally accepted method of proof. And maybe that's the point. Maybe reincarnation, if it is real, does not want to be dissected in the same way we analyze chemicals or galaxies. Perhaps it operates more like memory, more like story, layered, symbolic, and alive in the mind. The great tension lies between faith and evidence. Science asks, where is the data? Can it be verified, repeated, controlled? Spirituality asks, what does it feel like to know something without seeing it? And in between these two poles sits the human experience, confused, brilliant, vulnerable, and always reaching for meaning. Reincarnation may be the oldest possible answer to the question, why do I feel as though I've been here before? There are those who say we are born once, and live once, and die once. That consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, and when the brain ceases, so does the self. It is a clean, simple equation, but it doesn't explain why a child in Sri Lanka can name a town they've never seen, or why a Western skeptic emerges from a coma with knowledge of an unfamiliar language, or why so many people report not just a fear of death, but a familiarity with it. What if our stories do not belong only to us? What if memory itself is less like a hard drive and more like a cloud, with certain individuals logging into old accounts by accident or by design? What if time, as we understand it, is only one layer of a larger system, one in which the soul can move backward, forward, or sideways? In the end, reincarnation is not just a metaphysical question. It's an emotional one. It touches on grief, hope, justice, identity. If we come back, then perhaps the pain we suffer is not meaningless. Perhaps the lives we touch ripple beyond what we can see. Perhaps even our worst mistakes are not final, but part of a larger journey in which we get to try again. And that idea, while not provable, is powerful. For some, it offers comfort, the belief that they will see lost loved ones again or finish what they left undone. For others, it's a challenge, a call to live more fully, to act with integrity, knowing that the consequences may extend beyond one lifetime. And for a few, it's simply beautiful. The image of a soul, worn and wise, slipping into new skin like an actor taking on a new role, learning new lessons, and carrying forward a thread of something eternal. If there is any truth to it, then life is not a straight line, but a spiral. We are not born blank, but layered, and death is not a full stop, but a turning page. So where does that leave us? Still asking, still wondering, still listening to the quiet moments, a child's odd statement, a sudden feeling of recognition, a vivid dream that doesn't belong to this life. Whether you believe, disbelieve, or remain suspended in between, the mystery endures. We may never know for certain what happens after death, but in asking the question, and in hearing the many strange, poetic, and often unexplainable answers, we become part of a very old story, one in which the soul does not vanish, but moves, remembers, returns. And just maybe, so do we.